Welcome to Community 2030, where we're helping to shape the communities of the future. First of all, we'd like to say we're not looking to promote anything. We don't have an agenda. We're not looking for your money. Please keep it, and share this video if you find it interesting. Today, we're talking to Father Sean O'Leary, one of the great inspirational spiritual leaders and teachers of our time. And we're going to be talking about the subject of community and spirituality. We hope you find it interesting. So maybe, Sean, we could kick off, and maybe I could ask you, what sort of community did you grow up in?
So when you asked me that question, Paul, I first have to figure out, what do I mean by community? Am I talking about the family, the extended family, Cork City, where I grew up, Ireland, where I grew up? And so I'm going to kind of start at the center. I grew up in a big extended family. I was raised by my grandparents for the first 6 years. So I had 8 aunts and uncles and a great grandmother and grandparents, in a little housing estate, what they'd call in America now the projects, a place called Grana Braher, which was a new housing estate in the 1930s and 40s in Cork City. And so there was a big extended multi-generational family. So a lot of safety there, a lot of great neighborliness, very poor, but everybody just looked out for each other, not just in the family system, but in the avenue. There was 34 houses in the avenue. People just looked out for each other. And as you know, being Irish yourself, the two most important virtues for the Irish are generosity and hospitality. And so people shared the little they had. When people came to visit, they shared what they had, even to self-deprivation. And so a sense of community based on looking out for each other, and sharing the little bit you had, that was really, really important. That was my first taste of community.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the community you live in now, is there anything you miss from the community you grew up in? Is there anything you wish that you could take with you to the community you live in now?
I think the same level of kind of hospitality and generosity, as well as I do. Yeah, somebody walking to a clock at night, in Ireland, and expect to get a cup of tea, and people sit down and talk to them. You would never think of, going to anybody's house here without, making an appointment, and you certainly wouldn't arrive after 8 o'clock. Yeah. So the whole idea that you can just drop in at people and expect to be and fed, that's totally different here. And so I'm kind of shocked myself if somebody rings me after 8 o'clock. And, oh my God, am I back in Ireland again? So if I could take that sense of, the camaraderie and the expectation that, the house is open for everybody at any time, and that whatever food is available to everybody who visits. So I miss that a lot in American society.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, you live in LA now, is it? And you're a practicing priest?
Well, yeah, it's interesting that I live as a hermit. I live in the middle of a forest on top of a mountain. I have one neighbor who lives half a mile away, and the next neighbor after that is 2 miles away. And so I basically don't see another human being for most of the week. I go into town, there's a big town, a small town, 10,000 people, about 10 miles away from me, a place called Healdsburg. So it's Northern California, Northern Sonoma County, about 80 miles north of San Francisco. So I I basically have a community of one, except, as a priest, I have a Zoom community whom I say Mass for 3 Sundays a month. And up to 3 or 4 years ago, when I had a health issue myself, I was going down to Palo Alto, where the community is physically based, and saying Mass there every Friday, every Saturday, and every Sunday. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and so I had a practice in the same area, Los Altos, and I saw clients on Fridays and Saturdays every day. So I'm doing all that now via Zoom. So my community basically is just myself and my nearest neighbor, who's actually my closest friend, whom I have known for 34 years now, a woman called Arlene Brownstein. She's my naturopathic physician, my soulmate, and my dearest friend. And so apart from visiting with her, I don't see anybody. So I got a community of one, and all the wild animals that surround me.
Fantastic. Well, you look healthy and happy on it. But even though you miss that aspect from the community you grew up in, you're happy enough living the sort of hermit lifestyle, as you say, at the moment.
Yeah, very much so. And for up to the last 4 years, I divided my life into two segments. I would go down from my home here, travel down a 3-hour journey to Palo Alto. I had rented a little apartment there. And so I had wall-to-wall people for 3 days as a counseling psychologist and saying mass for a community. So I had wall-to-wall people 3 days a week, and then 4 days a week, just myself in the forest. Now, because of a health situation 4 years ago and because of the COVID, I'm doing everything via Zoom right now. And left to my own devices, I would be a complete hermit, but I feel like I have to contribute something to the world. And so I have to add something by interacting with people on a one-to-one basis in counseling and on a community basis through the work.
Sure. And in terms of projecting forward into the community you'd like to create for the future, because that's what I'm interested in, and talking to people about the communities they want to create, maybe that don't exist, or create something that hasn't been thought of before. And I know you've thought about this before with your congregation. What sort of community would you like to create?
So I spent 14 years in Kenya working as a missionary. I was involved with community development, famine relief, education, agriculture, community-based healthcare, all those kinds of things. And I had 3 rules of engagement. So I started about 19 different little communities over the course of 14 years. So I had three Swahili phrases I used: kujitegemea, kujieneza, and kujitumikia. So one is about self-reliance, that every community has to become self-reliant and not dependent on outside communities, which was a problem in Africa because there was so much foreign aid flowing in that it was killing local creativity. So the first rule for me was kujitegemea, self-reliance. The next rule was self-ministering, that every need of the community had to be met by somebody who was qualified to do that job. And I think even as a priest, when I think of ministry for me is there's a need in the community. There's a person who volunteers to meet that need. They're either they have the kind of qualifications to do so, or they're given the training to do so, and then they're commissioned by the community to act in that capacity in their stead. So for me, that's how communities form then, by being self-reliant and by being self-ministering, that whatever needs arise in the community answers those needs. And then the third one is kujieneza, which means self-propagation, not in the sense of advertising or trying to win people, but that if you're doing something which is working, other little communities will want to try to imitate that. And for me, that then becomes the template that it's not a question of mega churches or mega communities. It's a question of small communities interfacing and networking with each other. So we have to kind of look at what happened on planet Earth since the arrival of Homo sapiens sapiens 70,000 years ago. We went from nomadic pastoralists in little groups. A nomadic pastoral group can sustain a community 15 to 4 hours total, max. And then we went into agriculture, and we had the first towns, and then the first cities, and then we had the metropolis. And now we're in a situation where we got a global community of 8 billion people. And that for me is untenable. It has led to all kinds of abuses, where an oligarchy takes control of everything: the technology, the agriculture, the education, the medicine model, and we see what's happening as a result. So the next step is, I think, what you're proposing is small communities who are independent of each other, answering their own needs, whether they're agricultural needs, educational needs, medical needs, spiritual needs, and then networking with each other like a little lattice work of small communities, but that there's no oligarch, calling the shots. So I really appreciate what you're beginning to do, Paul, to create communities which may grow their own food, minister to their own health needs, educate their own children, do their own spiritual work as a community. For me, that's what the future is. And the dismantling of this megalopolis of 8 billion people being a little cabal.
Yeah, I think it's self-dismantling anyway at the moment. And what role do you think God or spirituality would play in any future community? What would God look like, or would he, she exist?
That is the very core element. There will be no successful community without going back to the realization that there is a source of some kind. Now, we've kind of wrestled with this notion right throughout, human history. Initially, once we developed the ability to think rationally, we started kind of thinking about where did we come from? Who made all of this? What happens when we die? So we created a whole bunch of different kinds of gods, 3 different kinds, basically. We had tribal divinities, who followed particular tribes around and was their god wherever they went. Then we had kind of a geographical divinities. So you moved into a particular territory. Now you're subject to this guy who owns that territory. And then we had portfolio gods. You're interested in war, this is the guy to follow. You're interested in art, that's the guy to follow. You're interested in agriculture, that's the guy to follow. So that's how we start off this multiplicity of gods. And then Zoroastrianism was the first group, and we're talking about 600 BCE in Persia, where they collapse all the divinities down to 2, a god of light and a god of darkness, Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. And then Judaism will take that and shrink it down to a one god. But this one god, unfortunately, is a kind of a distant demanding deity. And so we step ourselves from that notion of a one god to a kind of a grandmother who videotapes everything her grandkids are doing. And so I think that there are 3 aspects of the self. I call them the role self. So I'm playing the role of Sean, a guy with a Cork accent in this incarnation. And then there's the role self, which is my eternal holographic fractal of source that was never born and will never die. And then there's the source self, which is the ultimate divinity, which is basically love, pure, unconditional love. And if that is not at the core of communities, the communities will fragment and be taken over by an organization that kind of transmogrifies into an oligarchy that insta, a kind of orthodoxy, and dogma, and inquisitions, and crusades. We got the same cycle again and again and again. So if a real mystical divinity is not at the kind of experienced core of community, it'll fragment and destroy itself.
And do you think people will go back to religion as it was known in the past, or will they embrace something new, some sort of maybe something more earthly, or will it be some type of spirituality as opposed to religion?
Right. I think religion has its place. I say religion is the training with spirituality. You can't expect an 8-month-old baby to run. You're going to have to learn how to stand up and then waddle, and then walk and then run at some stage. You can't access, mystical spirituality, without the training wheels of some kind of, inculcation or initiation into some form of community. So religion has its place. It's really good for ritual, and it's really good. It should do 2 things. It should support us in our search for God and challenge us in our beliefs about God. But religion typically doesn't do that. So that's the place of religion going forward. But we need to move towards a mystical spirituality rather than just a kind of a dogmatic religion. So is there a place for religion in the future as training wheels for spirituality, in the same way as a little infant needs to kind of crawl before he can run? But ultimately, it'll be a spirituality based on personal experiences of the divine, not on kind of a credo, that somebody else made up, in the Council of Trent in 1546.
And will there be spiritual or religious leaders, do you think? I mean, is it fair to say you're a Catholic priest?
A Catholic with a small c now. I was thrown out by Rome in a 2-page Latin document in 2010 for my insubordination. Yeah, I regard myself as a Catholic with a small c, which means universal. So need for priests, I think, yes, in the same way that in any community, there'll be guys who are expert in agriculture, people who are expert in education, people who are expert in medicine, and there'll be people who are expert in kind of accessing the mystical dimension of what it means to be human. So yes, but they will be kind of appointed by the community in the same way that the farmer is, the kind of doctor is. They won't be self-appointed, and it won't be a hierarchical system, ordaining people. It'll be the community saying, you seem to have the kind of gifts we need, to teach us how to farm. You seem to have the kind of gifts to be able to kind of educate kids and draw their wisdom out of them. So you seem to have the kind of connection to the divine through your meditation or whatever that seems to be able to access these other dimensions. So yeah, we want you to act in that capacity in our stead. but always at the behest of the community.
And if the community in the future was to turn to Sean O'Leary and say, Sean, you've worked as a priest in the past, but we don't want you to be a priest now. We want you to be our shaman, say,
Yeah.
let's give it that title, or druid or whatever. Would you take on that role?
Absolutely, absolutely. For me, it doesn't matter. The titles are unimportant. It's the work that's important, you know. And I think the focus of a shaman or a priest of any kind is somebody who has pierced the veil, who has kind of regular contact with the other side interdimensionally, and not in any kind of a self-aggrandizing way, but just that the particular gift that this individual was given in this particular incarnation. And yeah, if I have a facility for that and the community has that particular need, I say, sign me up. And I don't care what title it is, you know, I don't care what it is, you know, if that's the job description of the guy you're looking for, and it kind of meshes with, you know, what my interests and my abilities are, absolutely.
Do you think you've performed similar roles in previous incarnations?
Unfortunately, yes. I've recovered about 11 different memories from past lifetimes, and in, I'd say, 8 out of the 11, I ran foul of some kind of a religious institution. Beginning, actually, I had an incarnation definitely as a druid, and I was upset at the fact that they were kind of hogging this esoteric knowledge and denying ordinary people. So I got, you know, excommunicated in some senses. It happened to me 2 or 3 times in medieval Europe as a monk and a theologian, running foul of the Christian and Catholic churches and being excommunicated from my position. So I obviously haven't learned my lesson yet, because I'm doing it this time as well.
Beautiful. And maybe you're doing it better. Maybe you're doing it better this time, or worse. And how did you access these past lives? Was it through like hypnotherapy or some sort of, or can I ask?
The very first one, yeah. I lived in Africa for 14 years with the 3 different tribes of people called the Kalenjin peoples, who had a form of reincarnation. When a baby was born in a Kalenjin village, it was given 3 different kinds of names. The first name had to do with the circumstances of birth. So if it was raining, a little boy would be called Kibruto. You know, if there was a lot of problems when the child was really born and it was a girl, she'd be called Chepchirchir. And so the name would tell the circumstances of the birth. If a little girl was born and she was called Chemungeno, I knew immediately she was born when the goats were going out to the salt lick. So I knew that's the first name. The second name was a pet name. They called Gainata Musarek, a porridge name that only the mother could use of the child. And the third name was, they would bring in an elder of the tribe who knew the ancestry of the baby, and he'd name off all the ancestors in chronological order. And when the child sneezed, they believed, oh, that's the ancestor that's come back. So there was this form of reincarnation. But I thought it was just a kind of quaint African system. I came to the States to study in 1987, and I did a workshop with a woman called Barbara Findyson on perinatal work. And it's a belief system that, you know, there are 4 critical stages in the birthing process. You know, he called them, Stan Grof called them basic perinatal matrices. And depending on a difficulty experienced at any one of these stages, you would have adult neurotic behavior that mimics that. So the first stage is the contractions begin, and the little baby who's been swimming and doing somersaults in utero, now the walls are crushing in, and that's a crisis. The second crisis is the head engages with the birth canal. The third one, that passes through the birth canal and is really, really suffocating. And the fourth one is you're into these bright lights, you're born, the umbilical cord is cut. And so there were 23 of us doing this workshop, and the expectation was that everybody would experience their own birthing process. That happened for 22 out of the group. When it came to my turn, I had an experience of being a young Tibetan girl sometime in the 1800s, giving birth to our own firstborn child. And it was such a powerful experience that literally I had sore thighs for about a week afterwards.
Wow.
And that was the first. And subsequently, I managed it through self-hypnosis, through meditation, and on one occasion with a very good friend of mine who was trained in Michael Newton's system of life between lives, and had a 4-hour session with him in which I experienced the last one before Sean.
Interesting. And do you think that the problems, some of the problems, or many of the problems the world faces at the moment is due to the sort of lack of religion or spirituality, or the sort of gap that's been created? It's been filled with something something else?
I would say that is the core issue. And in some senses, religion is partly to blame, as is scientism. And so a dogmatic caricature of God, and I just wrote a new book a few months ago called Putting God on Trial and Setting God Free, because God is a projection of the human shadow. But what happened is religion created a monster, and this was so distasteful that there was a reaction to it, atheists claiming that there was no God. So you've got a fight between dogmatic fundamentalist religion and the God-shaped hole in the human psyche created by atheism, which is a doctrine of meaninglessness, random kind of mutation from a big bang. And so these have been at each other's throats. The future lies in mystical spirituality meeting real science. So I invented a term many, many years ago that I called mysticists. So mysticists are a cross between mystics and scientists. And for me, that's the wave of the future. These are people like Teilhard de Chardin, who was an extraordinarily brilliant paleoanthropologist and at the same time a mystic. So it is the mysticists who are going to save this world. You can't save God without, you can't save the world without God, and you can't save the world by not admitting that science, real science, is giving us answers to the practicalities of being incarnated beings.
Yeah, beautiful. So I suppose finally, if we do create this, or whatever communities we will create in the future, and we will, and they will be different, how would you choose between wanting to live the hermit life as you've said you do and you enjoy, and maybe feeling that there's a need for you or a calling to be center stage as a leader in a community?
That's a great question, Paul. And so I think that, on the incarnational stage of the entire planet, there are, gurus in the Himalayas, who never see another human being, but they're impregnating the planet with the energy of love and compassion, and they're playing a part in the role. And then there are the Mother Teresas who are picking up, babies off the streets of Calcutta and feeding them and healing them. And so we're all somewhere along that spectrum of how we contribute to communities. So my personal preference would be to be a kind of mostly a hermit on a mountain and trying to, through meditation and through maybe writing or kind of podcasting, to be able to kind of contribute something to it, and then occasionally being part of a face-to-face community. I don't see myself, being in a village situation, living, as a neighbor to a whole bunch of other people. That's not attractive to me, and that's not my forte right now. Other people have that that ability and that kind of proclivity, and so I want to play a part on the team where I can make, occasional incursions into a physical situation, but mainly through prayer, meditation, and through writing and lecturing, and make my contribution to the community.
Yeah, beautiful. I think absolutely technology is going to play a part in the future. Some people think that, everything is collapsing, we'll go back to the land and it will sort of regress, but obviously, we can still embrace technology and use it in the future. But for now, Sean, I just wanted to thank you very much for participating. And I want to ask you to please continue to, as I know you will, preach the truth.
I'm Irish, I can't not do it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean. So if you'd like to learn more about Sean, you can visit his website at spiritsin.spacesuits.com, or you can look for his latest book, Setting God Free. Don't forget to share this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll be having lots more chats with people about the different communities that they want to build and create in the future. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day and see you next time.